Well, there's snow on the ground at Israel's farm, which means it must be January in FSX. This place looked quite different when I was here last week doing my fly-in video. In fact, it's the 1st of January today, and let's go for a ride while I tell you about my New Year's resolution. And that's going to be to sort out some kind of backup arrangement for FSX. I built this PC last Christmas, and since then I've steadily accumulated add-ons and tinkered with all sorts of things, as you do, while just turning a blind eye to the possibility of some kind of failure and having to start again from scratch. Now, my experience of backups is a fairly unsuccessful one, and I have to say that whenever it has come to the crunch, I've almost inevitably discovered that my backups haven't been much use at all. You're going to hear a lot of hot air about backups, and everyone's got an opinion. So here's mine. If you want your backups to work, keep it simple. Don't get hung up on automation or clever incremental archives or off-site media, fireproof safes and so on. All that stuff is very, very technical in the details. For decades now we've been sold this delusion that computers are consumer level appliances on a par with fridges and TVs, and it's nonsense, of course. Even the simplest of jobs requires a level of knowledge and attention to detail that most users won't have or aren't prepared to give. So backups, here's a rule of thumb, or let's have two. Actually, most of us have two thumbs. First rule of thumb: the amount of time and effort you need to invest in setting up a backup system is going to increase in some sense exponentially as a function of how complicated you make it. In other words, you want to keep it simple. And the second rule of thumb: the likelihood of the backup being of any use in the event that a failure happens is going to decrease in some sense in inverse proportion to how complicated you make it. Possibly some sort of inverse exponential function would be appropriate there. In other words, keep it simple. So lecture over, let's have a look at what I'm going to do. Now here's a cute little thing. This is a 500 gigabyte self-powered USB drive, and it cost me about £50. This is just about the simplest and most cost-effective backup medium you can get for a modern PC. It has no separate power supply. If you plug it into a USB port, your PC will recognise it without any fuss. Now I'm going to bang on about my point here. People will point out that you can get a 1 terabyte drive for the same money, and that the only difference is you have to plug its power supply in. I'm going to suggest you don't listen to that kind of talk. Any extra complication at all will reduce the chance that you have a useful archive to restore from in the event of a failure. Now, you may think this is a trivial example, but look at the big picture. If your backup drive needs to be plugged into 2 things instead of 1, you've just doubled the opportunity for failure. And I'm talking about human failure here, and I'm not making some complicated technical point. If you're still not convinced, here's the statistical argument. If you imagine 2 groups of 100 people, let's say, running identical backups, and the sole difference is that one group has self-powered USB drives while the other group have drives that need to be plugged in. When it comes to, let's say, Sunday night and they all press the button on their backups, some of those in the second group are going to fail because they aren't plugged in. Now, if you don't accept this, we'll have to agree to differ, but for everyone else, let's move on. So I've got an external USB drive, and I want a simple way to copy something onto it that will be useful in restoring FSX in the event of a failure. Now, ideally we'd like the restore to be as simple as possible as well, although that's not as important as making the backup process simple, because we're not going to have to do it very often. And the method I've chosen is to do a simple image copy. This copies the entire contents of the hard drive in my PC onto the backup drive. Now, depending on the program you use to do this, it will be more or less sophisticated. Usually, for example, it's going to use some kind of compression in creating the archive, so you won't need as much space on the backup drive as you have on the source drive. And it might also skip things that don't need to be backed up, like the Windows swap file. Now, my PC has FSX on its own drive, and there are good reasons for this, which I'm not going to go into here. But it's no good just backing up the FSX drive, because FSX also keeps all sorts of knickknacks on the Windows system drive as well, in the registry and in the user file system. So all this really means is we're going to need to copy the system drive as well, and so we save 2 images instead of 1. And yes, this is more complicated than saving 1 image, but it's still an awful lot simpler than any of the alternatives. So in the event of a failure, all we need to do is copy the 2 drive images back to their respective drives, and we should be back where we started, at least at the point of the most recent backup. And having said that, I will, as an aside, point out that this is another opportunity for human failure. Remembering our rules of thumb, the likelihood that the backup process is run consistently, and hence the likelihood that we have a useful archive in the event of a failure, is in some sense inversely proportional to how complicated it is to run it. In other words, if it's too fiddly, chances are at some point we're not going to be doing it. Now, my goal is to have something like an icon on the desktop that I can just double click every now and again and know that the backup will run. Now, one thing it is important for me to say at this point is my PC is only for FSX. In other words, I don't do other things on it. So if I restore my FSX image, I'm not going to lose anything else that I've been doing in the meantime that's been worth saving. Okay, so let's have a look at the details. Now I've chosen a program called Macrium Reflect, which is a free program, and I've used it to create a backup job that saves an image of my entire C drive, which is where I have Windows installed, and my entire F drive, which is where FSX and all its add-ons are stored, and it saves these images on the external USB drive. Just as a matter of interest, the backup currently takes about 2 hours, and it occupies a little bit less than 180 gigabytes of space on the external drive. Now, I've made sure this USB drive is big enough to comfortably hold both the C and F drives, even if they're full. And in fact, I've bought 2 of these so I can alternate, and I bought different colours as it happens, so I'm less likely to mix them up. Now, here's another classic opportunity for human failure. It's very tempting to leave it at that, and for me to diligently create my backups once a week or once a month, whatever I've decided is appropriate. But of course, since I don't know if I could actually successfully restore anything from the backups, I might well be wasting my time. What I need to do is have a practice run and actually restore something from a backup image, and this is the only way I'm going to know whether it's going to work when the chips are down. Now, I'm not going to trash my FSX installation just so I can try this, so I'm going to need another way. What I've decided I'll probably do is swap out the actual hard disks for a couple of scrap disks and see if I can restore a working Windows and FSX installation from my USB backup. First things first though, any attempt to restore my images is going to need to be done after booting from a rescue CD that my backup program's created. So before I do anything else, I'm going to check that I can boot from it. I can see my drives, including the backup drive, and then I can be reasonably confident that I'm going to at least be able to embark on the restore. So the first step in verifying that the backup's going to work is I've made my recovery disk. So this is going to be what I boot from after I've taken out the 2 hard disks, simulating a failure, you might say. So the first thing I've got to do is put this thing in the drive and just make damn sure A, that it boots the computer at all, and B, that when it boots into the recovery program it looks like I've got a fighting chance of being able to do anything useful. So not much to see at the minute. What I'm going to do now is to shut everything down, and hopefully you can see this. I'll hold the camera more usefully in a minute. So if I choose restart, and we should be going. So I've got my boot priority set, so it always tries the CD-ROM first. Let's see what happens. Okay, now this is going to look odd because this is I'm using a triple head to go on here, so everything's stretched at 3 times the width that it should be. It's difficult to read, but we should manage. So it's booting. Macrium rescue environment, that says. Please wait. So it's looking okay so far. Something recognizable. Do we have mouse control? Yes, we do. That's always encouraging. And there we go, we've got something. What does that say? Welcome to the image restore wizard. So that looks pretty good. Let's press next. We're not actually going to restore anything at the minute, but we want to make sure we can see all our drives. So there we go, we've got something that looks very much like Windows Explorer. I've got system drive, flight sim X drive. What else have I got? Very importantly, I have drive I, FSX Backup Blue. That contains my backup images. And we've got 2. We've got system C, 148 gigabytes, flight simulator X F drive, 279 and some odd. At this point where it says press next to continue, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to cancel, and it's going to boot back into Windows. And that's all we need for now. Okay, we're back. We're approaching the big test. This is the flight sim computer, sides off. So basically what I've done is I've disconnected the C drive, which is the system boot drive, and I've replaced it with this SATA disk rescued from another machine. It's obviously mounted very professionally here on a cardboard box. The other thing I've done is, you can't really see this, but down at the bottom that's the FSX drive F. I've disconnected the SATA connector from that, so that's not going to show up in Windows either. Of course, I realised I didn't need a SATA disk for the FSX disk, so I can use an external USB drive to be the F drive. Of course, I'll have a handy spare USB drive, which is going to be my second backup drive. So what we're going to do now, we're going to switch the thing on. So I'm going to set the camera up somewhere convenient, and I'll be back in a minute, and we'll try booting it and doing the restore. What I am going to attempt to do now, without the aid of a net, is to take my Macrium Reflect rescue disk. I'm going to attempt to boot the computer from it. We already know that's going to work because we've tried that out before. The slight wrinkle now is what happens after that. So what we're going to do first is attempt to restore the C partition and then boot from that. Once we're able to boot from that, we can connect up the second USB drive and we'll attempt to restore the F drive to that. So this, so far nothing new, we've been here before. Select the partition you want to restore. So we're going to select one partition at this stage. System C primary, and I'm going to click next. Choose partitions to overwrite with the image data. I'm going to choose, this is where I have to be careful, Backup 160G is the name of the new disk that I've just popped in. Just making sure I've selected the right disk there. Yeah, click next again. Okay, we're ready to go. I'm going to click finish. So this is probably going to take a couple hours to restore. I'm just waiting to see that it's actually underway. Okay, there we go, 1%. I'll just quickly zoom in on that so you get an idea. 2% completed, starting restore. And that's it for now. Looks good so far. I'll be back when it's finished and we'll just see just how good it was. Okay, we're back on the air. That was something of a surprise. It only took about 40 minutes, 45 minutes to repair that, to restore that. And here we go, partition image successfully restored. Now this is the first make or break point. We've got to try rebooting. Just to remind you what we've done, we've taken out the system drive, we've replaced it with a drive of appropriate size from another PC. We've restored the C drive image. I'm going to press cancel. Computer will now reboot. Is this going to work? Disk boot failure. Insert system disk and press enter. Okay, that's not a good sign. I'm sure it's a temporary glitch. We'll figure this out somehow. Okay, back again. A little bit more fiddling and have success. What I've basically done is I installed Windows 7 on the new disk, made it bootable, and then I restored the system partition again, and bingo, now I've got my familiar Windows 7 desktop with all my usual icons. If I zoom in just to show you some of that. Of course none of this is going to work at the moment because one thing is missing, which is the F drive with FSX on. So next thing to do is to take the currently spare second USB drive that's going to stand in temporarily as the FSX drive. So I'm going to plug it in and hopefully that's going to pop up in Explorer. There we go. There it is, FSX Backup Red. Well, that's handy, it's actually come up as drive F, so nothing to do, otherwise we'd go into Windows Disk Manager and change the drive letter, but it's right there as drive F. Let's just see what's on there at the minute. Nothing at all. So what we're going to do now, shut down and once again restart with the recovery disk in the drive, and this time restore the F partition. So I haven't gone into the details of what I did to restore that disk to bootable status. You've got to remember we're testing out the worst case scenario here, which is replacing the system disk with an entirely new disk, possibly unformatted, without Windows on it, not bootable. Now very rarely want to do that unless we have some sort of catastrophic disk crash. What we'd normally be doing is just reinstalling over the top of the old system. Okay, back again, and this partition has just successfully restored. As you can see, this took one heck of a lot longer than the first restoration took. Basically started at 9:45 this morning and currently 3:10 in the afternoon, so that took something like 5.5 hours to restore. Most likely because, I mean, it's a bigger partition, but most likely because both the source and the destination are USB 2 drives, so a lot of saturation on the bus probably there. So now the very big test is we're going to press cancel on this, reboot the computer, and hopefully we can see the F drive and everything's going to work. Well, let's run track IR. In fact, let's do everything I would normally do. Real environment extreme. Fly now. Move that over there. Whoops, out there. FSX Go. I'm going to choose my general startup profile. There's FSX. There's SPAD if you look at the panels, and there's EZCA's up. Okay, there's FSX. Let's Rex do its thing over there. Okay, here we are, and everything appears to be A-OK. So just to recap what we've done, we've made a complete backup of FSX by taking images of both the system and the FSX drives and then saving them in a single operation onto an external USB drive. We've then swapped out the system and FSX drives and replaced them with a couple of spare drives. This leaves the computer without either FSX or Windows installed, and we've then restored everything from the backup, and it works without a hitch. Now for me that's a successful test, and I can be pretty confident that if I run this backup once in a while I'll be able to get back my FSX in a couple of hours in the event of a failure. Now I'm not saying this is the only way to back up FSX, and I'm not saying it's the best way necessarily, but if you take two essentials away from this, it's that I've created a simple backup and I've made sure it works by trying it out for real. If you can create your own system by sticking to these two principles, then you'll be well served too. One slight change you might want to make is to find a program that images your drives from outside of Windows. There is a school of thought that says imaging a live installation is too much of a moving target to be reliable, but at the end of the day this is not a life critical application, and you are going to lose a bit of convenience that way. So that's it. I hope you found this helpful. For me, well, I can sleep a bit easier now if nothing else.